Hey guys, welcome back to another video. This is going to be a marker comparison video for professional alcohol markers. So in this review, I'm going to compare 11 different alcohol markers. And so they are Flex Marker, Pro Marker, Spectrum Noir, Mepsi, the Copic Sketch. The Copic Sketch in the 25th anniversary because I wanted to try out the fine tip. And like a lot of artists say that you need the brush tip in order to get like a painterly kind of blend. And I wanted to test out that theory by using a fine tip marker that's considered to have the best quality ink and nib. So I wanted to see if it would live up to the same expectation as all other fine tip coloring. And so then there's the Chow marker, which I only have the blender pen for, but it pretty much has the same nibs as the Copic Sketch. It's just that it's a little smaller and rounder. So that I'm only going to compare this marker based on the physicality of the marker and like how comfortable it is in the hand. And so then there's Prisma color, there's Touch Twin marker, the Tria markers, and the new Windsor Newton brush markers that I just received today. Alright, so the first one up is the Flex marker. It's made by a company called Letraset, and I also have two other markers, the Pro markers and the Tria markers, that are also made by Letraset. So this one is a brush tip marker. Here's the brush tip. It looks really nice and like thin at the tip, and it lays down color really smoothly, and the tip does not stick to the paper whatsoever, no matter how much you bend it. Though it does feel a bit stiff, and like the flexibility, there's a limit to the flexibility. It's just about less than a quarter of the tip is flexible. And then it has also a chisel nib that also like lays down color really nice and smoothly, and there's no streaks or anything. The only problem with this marker I've had in the past is that the nib on the brush end gets ruined really easily. Like sometimes it gets frayed or bent. Actually, a lot of my markers that I got just came with the nib bent, and all my markers were bought brand new in sealed packaging. So I don't understand how this is happening. So here's an example. It's my black marker, and as you can see, the end of the tip is a little frayed and it's slightly bent. So it doesn't produce that accurately of a thin line, and it also makes the ink start feathering in the paper because the end of the tip frayed. So yeah, that's not a good point for the Flex marker, but I do really enjoy the ink laydown of how the nibs perform. For the comparison, I'm using my previous modern Victorian line art that I made in my previous video, and I photocopied it 11 times, one extra time to show just the line art without any coloring, and then the 10 times just to color it in and actually compare. The Flex marker I really enjoyed using. It laid down color really nice and smoothly. It also allowed me to blend. I do apologize, the video is going to be quite long because a video really cannot handle 10 different speed paints unless I speed it up by a really astronomically high number. So I do apologize that the speed paints are going a little too fast paced for you to tell if the blending is working or if the ink laydown is nice and smooth. But I do still hope you get a good idea of how these markers work. And I did make a mistake on her arm, and then I just decided to fill in the entire dress, the bottom part of her dress, in one solid color, just to show you how the markers lay down a solid color and to see if there's any patchiness in the coloring or if it all blends together. So that's what I was doing with the arms and the bottom of the dress for the rest of the coloring comparisons. Next up we have the Pro marker. This is a fine tip marker. So here's the fine tip. It also lays down color really nice and smoothly, just like the Flex marker. And it also has a chisel nib, which is identical to the Flex marker chisel nib. And so these colors, the ink of this marker lays down really nicely, and it's very blendable. Like most fine tip markers, I've had a problem blending with, but this particular marker has, like, I think it's the ink or maybe the way the tip is made that makes the ink really blend right when you hit it on the paper. So yeah, the tips are also really nice and sturdy. They don't get frayed or like bent or anything. So that's a good point about this marker. Coloring with the Pro marker was also very enjoyable, even though it's a fine tip. It is pretty round at the tip, so I was able to just lean it a little bit to its side and it covered in a whole much larger area. The blending was quite nice. I was surprised because it is a fine tip marker, so I wasn't expecting the blending to be like brush tip quality, but it was very similar to the brush tips. It actually performed better than some of the brush tips that I will be coloring with. Also, the color filling for the Pro marker was very smooth compared to other fine tip markers. Alright, so the next one's called Spectrum Noir. This is a fine tip marker. It's really cheap. It was specifically designed for crafters, but really it works the same as an alcohol marker. So here's a tip. It's a little bit wider than the Pro markers, but the ink lays down just fine. I've had a problem though blending these type of markers, even if like the color is just a number away from the previous color that I'm using to try and blend. It still gives me problems and the blending just ends up looking very blotchy. I think that might be a quality problem with the ink, but so yeah, they also have a chisel nib, very similar and to the other chisel nibs, and it works just the same. But I rarely use the chisel nibs, so I'll mostly be focusing on the bullet end of the markers. For the Spectrum Noir, I probably had the most struggle with blending. And I'm pretty sure it was because of the ink, because I was using colors that are very similar to each other and it still was not blending. So here you'll see I'm trying to do the tip to tip method. I don't quite think I was doing it right because you need to lean it a certain way for the ink to actually transfer onto the lighter nib, but it did not work, and just after a few tries I just gave up and just continued coloring the image. The next one up is Mepsi brush marker. I actually really love this marker. So this was my first brush marker that I invested in a complete set. So here is the brush tip. It's very soft and smooth. It feels really nice to color with. It doesn't squeak or anything. But the only problem is if you color a large area, the nib just like slightly grips the paper, and that's more noticeable when you're coloring in large areas like backgrounds or sky or something like that. But really, to me, it doesn't bother me that much. So I really love this marker. It also comes with a chisel nib, which I rarely use, but yeah. So it's a pretty hefty marker. I'd have to say though that when I'm coloring in a full image in these markers, the smell is really noticeable, and I have to keep my ceiling fan on in order for me to continue the drawing, because it makes me nauseated after I color for a bit. I was coloring a few images for my sister's children's book, and like 2 hours down the line of smelling this ink, I started feeling really lightheaded and dizzy. So definitely when you're using these heftier markers with the brush nibs, I think even the hefty markers with the bullet ends don't have that much of a smell, because really the ink is just exposed to that tiny little bullet area. So definitely if you're using these larger brush markers, keep your ceiling fan on. It would help a lot if you're coloring in large images. For the Mepsi marker, I did really enjoy using coloring with its really soft brush tip, but in her skin tone I made a mistake and I accidentally picked up this really fluorescent pink color instead of a skin tone color. Like I used a skin color then, I think it was Biscuit, the one that I used to cover over her entire face and hand, and that really blended out the pink color and made it look like it wasn't even there. I feel like Mepsis are the way to go. Even if like you slapped on a wrong color somewhere, you could easily fix it with some lighter Mepsi colors. That just tells me that Mepsis are very versatile with the colors that you lay down. It's not that permanent. You can still play around with the color to get the effect that you want. Alright, so the next one is the Copic sketch marker. This is a brush marker, and I was really excited to purchase these because these always get exceptional reviews online everywhere, and all marker artists are saying this is the best marker with the best nibs and the best ink and the best like color selection. I do agree with the color selection because there are a total of 358 I believe, and that is a really wide variety of colors. I've never seen a color selection that big on any other brand before. So here is the brush end of the marker. It's very smooth. I've got to say it feels even smoother than the Mepsi marker, and the color laydown is really nice and decent. These are really blendable. And it also has a chisel in, which I rarely touch, but this chisel nib looks a lot narrower than the other chisel nibs that I've seen, so that might help in cases of filling in detailed areas. But yeah, I mostly just use the brush end. Now I'm coloring with the Copic markers, and these were very enjoyable. Similar to the Mepsis, they're a bit more comfortable in the hand. I feel like square markers don't really fit in your hand that well as these narrower markers do, but the worst marker, the most uncomfortable marker, is definitely the Spectrum Noir. It's like this weird octagonal shape. I don't know what they were thinking when they made that shape, but it just feels like all the corners keep interfering with my knuckles, and I don't know how to bend my hand to best use the marker while coloring in a large area or blending. But the Copics did perform really well. The color laydown surprisingly was very patchy, but you could definitely use this to your advantage if you want to show effects of shading. Then there's the Chow marker, which I won't be doing a coloring of because I only have the blender pen, but it's the same idea, same nibs, same ink quality, but the design of the marker is slightly different. It's rounder and it's more, like, in my opinion, this feels more comfortable because I really like working with narrow markers, narrow pens, like narrow everything. So if I had a choice of getting all the chows or all the sketches, I would definitely get all the chows. And obviously the chows come in 180 colors only and the sketch comes in 358. So you'll be saving a lot of money if you invest in the full set of chows instead. Next up is the Copic sketch in the 25th anniversary with the fine tip. I'm not entirely sure that this fine tip is the exact same fine tip that's on the sketch original, but it might be. So I've noticed a significant difference though with this fine nib and other fine nibs is that this one lays down much more finely. Like it's more accurate. It's more like a pen when you try and color with it. So it's going to take me quite a while to finish the drawing in just these tiny pen nibs, but I'm definitely gonna try it out. And everything else is the same. It has a brush end too. It's just pretty much the color and the extra fine nib that's different. The Copic fine tips were pretty hard to use. They created the most streaking and unevenness in color when I was trying to color the bottom of her dress. It was also very noticeably hard to blend with these Copic fine pens, but I'm guessing that is because it is a very stiff and very fine nib, so I wasn't expecting the performance to be that good. But then again, the Pro markers did perform much better for a fine tip than even the Copics did, so I was very surprised. I was just doing this one time just for the comparison of how the Copic fine tips work, because I kept thinking that it would blend really well even though it's a fine tip because it has Copic ink and the nibs also. But unfortunately I was wrong about that, so now I know, and now I'll only use it for detailed work. Alright, then we have the Prisma color marker. These are brush markers. These are their newer brush markers. Previously they've had a only a fine tip and a chisel end marker, but this one has a brush end and the fine tip end. So this is very similar to the Pro marker fine tip and the Spectrum Noir as well, but a very big difference between this marker and other markers is I find this marker really hard to blend with, and I think it's because of the nib. It feels very gummy and like almost rubbery, and it sticks to the paper like anything. It's probably sticks to the paper the worst out of all the markers I'm reviewing. So that is kind of noticeable. I think that plays a part in how badly it blends, but you can really blend this marker. You have to be patient though. You need to lay the color on top of the marker and really like just smoothly and gently be very slow with it. So one thing that really annoys me about this marker is you have to be patient when you're coloring with it, otherwise you're not going to get that blend and it's just going to look like your blending's just going to look messy. So yeah, but other markers I find that you can go at your own speed and it will still blend. So this might be annoying for people that want to color in real quickly and like get masterpiece quality works done in a fast-paced manner. But the color color laydown's pretty decent. And it comes in 200 different colors, but really it's 200 minus 4 because 4 markers are they're like metallic gold and silver, so it's really not 200 colors, but it's still a decent amount. The Prisma colors weren't that bad. The stickiness I only felt when I was coloring in her shirt and her dress. So larger areas definitely you'll feel the stickiness more, but the smaller areas I didn't really feel it. I took my time with the blending and it did a pretty good job blending. Surprisingly, the shirt did not blend though, because I think the pinks I used were just too different. So I used a purple as a mid-tone, but that still didn't blend into the pink. I think because the pink was too intense and the purple was muted, so it didn't quite blend in that nicely. The color laydown is exceptional for the Prisma color along with the Trias. It doesn't show any patchiness in the ink. Next one up is the Tria marker. This is also made by Letraset, which made the Pro marker and the Flex marker. It comes with a brush tip, which is not really a brush tip because it's very stiff and like barely even flexible. And I've had a problem with this marker. It doesn't blend very well, and I'm guessing that's because of the stiff nib probably, but at least the nib doesn't get messed up that easily and you can be a little rough with it. And then there's actually 3 nibs. So this is the bullet nib, which is actually very similar to the Pro marker. Actually, it's much finer than the Pro marker. Never mind. It's more like the Copic Anniversary fine tip marker. And then there is the oh god. All right, so this happened. Okay, so there is. I don't know how you can see that, but there's supposed to be a sponge in here to absorb the ink coming from the bullet nib, and it just fell out. So yeah, that's interesting. I just got these markers a couple months ago, so I don't know how this happened. I don't know what I should do with this little bit of the nib now, but yeah, it looks like I'm not going to be able to use this end of the marker because without a sponge the nib won't transfer any more ink. So yeah, it also got bits of the nib on the... Okay, there we go. Alright, so already losing points for Tria, but something I've noticed over the years is that in the past Tria had a total of 300 different colors, but now they decreased their color selection to 200, which interests me, and I don't really know the reason why. If anybody knows the reason why the Tria marker, why Letraset decreased the color selection for Tria markers, please let me know in the comments. With the Tria markers, I had trouble blending similar to the Spectrum Noir. I was using very similar colors and it just was not blending. You could still see the lines to where I used the darker color. So that did annoy me, but the coverage of the ink was really nice. Also, the stiff nibs didn't bother me that much. It didn't drag on the paper or anything. It glided on the paper because it's stiff, so it works more of like a bullet nib. So I did enjoy like filling in large areas of color with this marker. It's just that the blending did not really work, even in the hair, even in like the little yellow ribbons and stuff, but it gets really good color coverage. Next is the Touch Twin brush marker. I've got this marker because a lot of artists are saying this is the second best thing to Copics and it's so similar to Copic, so I wanted to try that out for myself, and I can tell you that I cannot disagree more. This has a lot of flaws. I found a lot of flaws with this marker. So it is a brush tip marker. Here's a brush tip. There is a problem with pigmentation, and you can't really see it in this light color, but I'll show you in a darker color. So this is Marigold, and as you can see, while I'm flicking, it turns from orange to like a yellowy color, and it doesn't, like, the marker feels very dry, and it leaves streaks. Like, you can see the streaks. And this could probably be avoided if I color over an area a number of times, but for other markers, if I color it in just once, then it gives good coverage. So why bother with this marker? I just really feel like the dryness of the nib really annoys me. Also, it sticks to the paper quite noticeably. It's gotta be the second worst to the Prismacolor. The Prismacolor is definitely the worst in terms of sticking to the paper, but this one is the second worst. Also, the lack of pigmentation while you color in a larger area just annoys me, because I do usually complete illustrations with these markers, and if I have to color in an area like 3 or 4 times, that will very much annoy me, and I would rather invest in a different marker. So yeah, that's what I have to say about the Touch Twin marker. The chisel end is fine, quite fine. Also, something to notice is, something I forgot to mention is when I ordered these from the shop in New York, they made a mistake and they sent me the fine tip Touch Twin markers with the black barrel, and so I let them know, and then they apologized. They sent me a return label to return the item, and they shipped me the actual brush tip markers. But when I had the fine tip markers, I got to try it out, and it was very similar to the Spectrum Noir. I was having trouble blending. I think it was because of the ink quality, but it didn't have this pigmentation problem, the fine tips, obviously, because it's a fine tip. And I noticed that as it dries, it kind of improves slightly, like the ink blends in a little bit. There's still some streaking though, but so as it dries, the ink does like fuse in together, but yeah, I don't know if it's worth it to go over a certain area a number of times. Alright, for the Touch Twin marker, I did only purchase 5 markers because I didn't want to make a huge investment in all these other markers that I was buying, and also these markers like didn't have any good sales or anything. They were just a solid price everywhere I found them. So I was just like, okay, I'll just get a few just to review them. All the colors I had were like orangish, brownish, but 2 of them actually looked really, really pale, so almost like blender pens. When I was coloring this, it felt a lot like a 3 marker challenge, but yeah, so I was surprised at how it did blend, but I was forcing it a little bit on the shirt. And the last marker I'm going to be reviewing is the new Windsor Newton brush marker. I've gotten these courtesy of Call Art America, so thank you very much. And so this is supposed to be the new replacement to the Flex marker. And so here's the nib. It feels almost exactly like the Mepsi brush marker. It even looks exactly like the Mepsi. Hang on, let me show you. So yeah, it's very, very similar. Hang on, the shadow is getting in the way. Yeah, So very similar in terms of color laydown and also stickiness. This brush nib sticks to the paper very slightly though. It's not that bad. But I still really like the flex marker though. Letraset mentioned to me that they are discontinuing their flex marker, so you really need to make a choice of whether you want a slightly stickier brush nib, but with the guarantee that the brush nibs aren't going to get frayed or bent, or like a smoother brush nib, but it might be damaged. So you have to get lucky to get a flex marker that's not damaged. Some really few, I mean not few, I guess about half of the collection of flex markers that I have, I've been fortunate enough to get like the really fine nibs, but I really do enjoy the smoothness of the flex marker. It's almost exactly like the Copic, the way it lays down color and it doesn't stick to the paper. But I think if I had had a choice of whether to get a smoother nib but the chance of it fraying or getting ruined later on, or a slightly stickier brush nib that won't get damaged, I think I would choose the brush marker over the flex marker. So that's just my opinion though. Then we have the new Windsor Newton brush markers. I did really enjoy using these colors, but I mostly got intense primary colors, so I tried to use all the muted tones to try and get a decent blend. Also, I wanted to do black hair, but I didn't have any grays. But I have seen other artists that are coloring black hair, they put blue on top of the black to sort of blend it out into a slightly lighter but still dark enough to see that it's black hair kind of color. So I tried to do that and it worked out pretty well. I like how the blue is almost translucent over the brownish black hair. Alright, so just to overview the coloring, Flex Marker blended really nice and smooth. The ink laid on really good and it didn't stick to the paper. The Pro Marker also blended quite good for a fine tip marker, because if you compare it to the other colorings that I did in fine tips, the Copic Fine, the Spectrum Noir, and the Tria, I consider it a fine tip marker because really the nib is really stiff and it just acts like a thicker fine tip marker, but I still consider it a fine tip just because it really doesn't do that much of a blending. Even like in her hair, I was using warm grays that literally were just a number away from each other and it still did not blend. And that's probably because of the stiff nib on these markers. So compared to the other three stiff nib markers, the Pro Marker performed the best. So this is really a good quality fine tip marker, and it does perform better than other fine tip markers in my opinion. So then there's the Spectrum Noir, which didn't blend like quite as nicely. I was having trouble even with her ribbon. I was using BT5 and BT4, and even though they're very similar colors, if you look in real close, it did not blend whatsoever. You can still differentiate the line from where I used the BT5. So, and in her hat, I just got really frustrated and I tried to overblend it, and then it started blotching out of the outline. So that is a note to consider. So yeah, in her shirt, I was trying to do the tip-to-tip method because I thought it would help it to blend more, but it wasn't helping that much. It was just like when you overblend, the blending will start to look messy and blotchy. So you don't want to do that. You don't want to keep like forcing the lighter color over the darker color, because that's just going to make your drawing ruined even more. Yeah, I don't approve of this marker. I think it was meant just to be for crafters, just to color in tiny images here and there, but definitely not for professional illustrators. So the Mepsi was really nice. It blended in nice and smooth. It also felt really comfortable, like the nib was really soft and really laid down on the paper nicely. And I did make a mistake where I chose a pink color in her skin, but as you can see, it blended out really nicely with a different color, so it's easy to correct your mistakes if you're using Mepsi, I find. And yeah, so the Copic, surprisingly, when I was trying to fill in color for her dress, it got really, like the ink is patchy, which is interesting. I wasn't expecting that. But then again, you could use this to your advantage, because it looks like, almost like it's shaded, and like out of all of the other dresses that I colored, this drawing looks complete because it looks like the dress is shaded, even though I didn't intend to shade the dress. It was because of how the ink laid out on the paper. But the other areas blended in quite nicely. The purple on the ribbon didn't quite blend that nicely because they're two really different colors, but it did a little bit. You can see over here, and like just on the edges of the flicks, you can see it blended in a little bit. I also really like how detailed the nib on the Copic, the brush nib, if you hold it at an angle, it produces a really fine line. So I used that to make some of her hair strands, and it allowed me to get into a lot of detail. So I did really appreciate that about the Copic marker. So the patchiness of the color laydown you can use to your advantage. So it's up to you whether you see this as a flaw or a benefit. The Copic Fine was really surprising to me. I was expecting it to perform much better because I've always heard that Copic has better ink than other markers. I also don't think this is the same tip that's on the Copic Originals. I think because they have two fine tips. They have the medium fine and the super fine. I think this is the super fine, and the Copic Originals have medium fine, which is a little thicker than this. So the color laydown was really patchy. It was also a little streaky in her skirt and part of her arms. It did not blend very well in the hair. It did blend in her ribbon and stuff, but that's because I was using very, very similar colors. But compared to the Pro marker performed much better than the fine tips on the Copic marker. Prisma color also had a slight problem with blending. It got a little blotchy in her hat. I did color knowing that these markers are going to take a little while to blend, so I was taking my time and like really trying to push the colors into each other. The shirt didn't blend that well, so I tried to, because like the two pinks that I chose were too different, so I tried to go in with a purple as a middle tone, but it didn't help that much. It still did not blend no matter how much I was shoving the color into each other. So, but the color outline, like the color laydown of the dress is really nice and smooth. I don't see any patchiness whatsoever. So it's good for like just filling in blocks of color. And the same goes for the Tria marker. It's, as you can see in her dress, it's like there's no patchiness or no streaks or no anything. It's very a solid color. But as you can see in her hair, I mentioned before that that I was using very similar grays, but it still did not blend. And even in her skin, if you look real close, and I will be scanning these in and posting them on my website so you could compare for yourselves, but even in the skin, the two colors that I chose for the skin color did not blend in together, even though it was really very similar. So for the Touch Twin brush marker, I was surprised at how it laid down color. I was expecting a whole lot more streaks, just because when I was swatching it on paper, it felt very dry and almost like it was dragging, the ink was about to finish as it was dragging on the paper. So I was expecting a whole lot more streaks than this, but this is quite decent. It's very comparable to, actually it's worse than all the rest. So actually this is the has the least quality if you just want to lay down color, and mostly it's in the skirt where you can see most of the streakiness, but obviously if you color over an area a number of times, it would completely alleviate this problem. So another issue I had, I kind of over blended on her hat, so the light color bleached into her hair. I also feel like I over blended in the shirt too, but the shirt did blend in quite nicely. Another problem I noticed, when I was flicking, you can see this the best in her hair, that the ink looks grainy for some reason. I don't know if it's the type of paper. It shouldn't be the type of paper that I'm using, because it didn't happen to any of the other markers I was testing out. I'm just using 80-pound cardstock. So it looks really grainy and almost like I used a dry marker to try and color these areas. This is definitely not the top quality Illustrator marker. You can definitely work around it if you know how it works. And I feel like all these markers, if you knew how they worked better, then you could color with it in a way where the flaws won't show that well. For example, I know that the Trias don't blend well, the Spectrum Noirs don't blend well, so I would use them for more graphic art where there's just color over color and there's no blending, but it still looks like a decent work of art. I just realized that something I completely forgot to mention were the color charts for the markers. So I didn't make color charts for every marker because most of them I just had a handful of them, but for the Mepsi I mentioned that I do have the full set, but it's not really, it's the full set minus the 40 grays. There's a problem though with their color selection, and it's just that a lot of the colors look repeated. R09 and R17 look almost exactly alike. 007, 009 also look, it's 007 and 006 look identical, and G16, G17, it just, also G28, G29, it looks exactly like the same color. And each of these markers come at $4.50 each a marker, I'm guessing, but I haven't checked the price recently, but it just made me feel really disappointed that I thought I was getting 200, well the full set is 200 colors, but I have about 150. When I was getting them, I was expecting 150 different colors, but obviously a lot of them were doubles. Here's another one, these two colors. So yeah, it was really disappointing to find all these doubles. I do enjoy how it performs in general, so I'm not too disappointed that I ended up getting a whole bunch of doubles for this marker, but it is a flaw to consider. So here's the Pro Marker color chart. As you can see, I have all the colors except mango, which I did look up what the color looks like, and it looks just like a middle color between peach and bright orange, so I just thought that I'd never use that color, so just not get it. Also, Set releases limited edition colors for this pro marker, and I tried to collect all of them, but obviously it was getting annoying. Like, they started in 2012, I believe, and then the most recent colors they made were from 2014. So I don't know if they're gonna still continue this, but it does get annoying because when you think you have the full set, really you don't, because there's all these limited edition colors that aren't included in the 148 colors of the pro marker. Yeah, it's just extra money that comes out of your pocket and trying to buy the full set. Yeah, those are the only two markers that I have the full set of. And the markers that I recommend are the Pro marker, definitely the best fine tip marker I've ever tried. The Mepsi marker, it's pretty good. It's much better than the Touch Twin marker. I definitely recommend this marker more than this. The Copic, but obviously a lot of people don't have the funds to get a decent amount of Copic markers, so I definitely understand that. Prisma color I really don't want to recommend because it's okay, but the blendability isn't that great compared to other markers. Also, the stickiness of the nib is something to get annoyed about. The Tria marker, again, doesn't blend very well, but it does have very sturdy nibs and it won't get ruined for a long time. Touch Twin marker, I don't recommend it. The dryness of the marker gets annoying. Even though it gets decent coverage, it will annoy you if you're coloring in a large area or a large illustration with just these markers. Alright, and the brush marker is another one I recommend, and I recommend it over the flex marker because the nib won't get ruined that easily. Definitely, well, considering that it was really comparable to the Mepsi, and I love the Mepsis, so it's just the smell that's different, the weight also. This is much lighter, so I do recommend this over the Mepsi though. But also the tips. Out of all of the markers, the brush marker and the pro marker have very obvious tips where you can tell, okay, this is the fine tip or the brush tip, and this is a chisel tip. All the other markers I have to give a second look to find where the chisel tip is and the brush tip is, and sometimes I look too quickly and I accidentally open the wrong tip. I definitely love these two markers. I feel like if you have the full set of a pro marker and brush marker, you're good to go. You don't need any of these other markers. So this is something I did not show. It is the bottom. It's like the scrap paper that I use to go over. So here's the bleed through. As you can see, it's very similar, not a whole lot different. A lot of people that were reviewing the touch marker were saying that it doesn't bleed through as much as the other markers, but I got very similar results. I don't know if I was coloring in too much probably, but yeah, very similar results. Anyway, this was the paper that was underneath my coloring just to make sure the ink doesn't smear my table or anything, and there is a few spots in places. So this actually came from the Touch Twin brush marker. It was in the shirt, in her shirt over here. I did mention I was over blending, and yeah, I was over blending because it shouldn't have transferred onto the underlying cardstock. I am using 80 pound though, so maybe if I was using 100 pound or more, then it wouldn't have this problem, but the other markers didn't have a problem with this. So there's the Prismacolor also. This was from the Prismacolor. It bled through the paper. This was from the Tria marker. Yeah, it did bleed through the paper. The other colors didn't really bleed through. It was just a touch twin, the Prismacolor and the Tria markers, that transferred onto the second piece of cardstock. Alright, that's all I have to say. Thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it was beneficial for you to make the decision of which markers would work best for you. Thank you very much, and stay tuned for my next video, which is going to be all about different kind of papers to use with your alcohol and water-based markers. Alright, bye guys.